Well, hello everyone and welcome to the live preview show for the British Grand Prix, round 4 of the truncated Formula 1 World Championship, the RaceWeek Roundup, where we will preview the British Grand Prix and go through the latest news. So, first and foremost, let's talk about the latest news. Seems like having a few problems with the sound, but talking about the latest news going into this weekend. First off, this was talked about last week, but we have an updated calendar with new races added. We are now up to 13 Grand Prix planned races this year. Of course, this could all be subject to change if COVID, the currently still fluid situation that COVID presents, that this could change. But on the 11th of October, we will have the German Grand Prix, which actually is going to be known as the Eiffel Grand Prix, probably due to licensing reasons, rather than the German Grand Prix. It will be taking place on the 11th of October. And then we have the Portuguese Grand Prix at Algarve, which is apparently going to be open to spectators, which, with social distancing restrictions, which will take place on the 25th of October. And then that will be known as the Portuguese Grand Prix. And then a week after that, we will have F1 will return to Imola for the first time since 2006. I mean, just like F1's returning to the Nürburgring for the first time since 2013. But F1 is returning to Imola for the first time since 2006. But it's not actually going to be called the San Marino Grand Prix, weirdly. It's going to be called the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. But that's going to take place on the 1st of November. That's going to take place on the 1st of November. But it's not been all good news for everyone, because with some races being added, we had some cancellations as well. And these are no surprise, as all 4 races in the continent of North and South America have now been cancelled. So that is the United States Grand Prix in Austin, the Mexican Grand Prix, a race which I really did think was still going to feature, the Brazilian Grand Prix, which on the other hand I knew was not going to feature considering their rise in cases, and the Canadian Grand Prix, which's cancellation looked like a bit of a formality many months before. In terms of the rest of the calendar, it does seem pretty certain that F1 will go to Bahrain and Abu Dhabi, with potentially 2 races in Bahrain. But when those are on the calendar, we don't know. It depends on if there's going to be any more races in between when F1 leaves Imola and F1 goes to Bahrain. That is when those races' dates will depend on. But there are races being hinted at to go into that gap. Firstly, in the form of Vietnam. Now, I was really surprised. I'm really surprised that Vietnam is now being talked about, that it could still host a race this year. Because you'd have thought that they'd probably be canning it by now. They'd say that a late season date, then they'd have to dismantle and reassemble the track in short notice. Because that would not really be ideal. But it does seem like they do want to host a race this year. And there have been talks of other tracks, such as Malaysia being on the calendar. If Vietnam and Malaysia, another race, is on the calendar, because it does look like China is going to be cancelled due to their government guidelines, then it makes sense to think that the calendar will be at 18 races this year. So, in going into the next race, speaking of the calendar, the F1 are also said to be closely monitoring the situation in Barcelona for the Spanish Grand Prix, because obviously they've had a rise in cases, particularly in the Catalonia region in Spain. And in at the moment, the race is on, but it all depends on because F1 is monitoring the situation there, and they do have a backup plan. Apparently their backup plan is that if the Spanish Grand Prix can't take place, then they will have a third race at Silverstone. I'm assuming that they have a backup plan for pretty much every country for if they can't take place, which could involve 2 races at a country. And obviously this is the plan in a certain circuit, and obviously this is the plan that they have in place for the British round, or for the Spanish round, for if that does not take place. And then news this morning: Sergio Perez was denied entry into the paddock after an inconclusive coronavirus test. Now, of course, this doesn't necessarily mean that the test showed that he might have it. This basically shows that maybe the test was not done properly, and they don't want to risk it. But if it turns out that he did catch coronavirus, that he has caught coronavirus, then apparently it seems that Racing Point share Mercedes reserve drivers, and those are in the form of Stoffel Van Dorn and Esteban Gutierrez. I personally think in this situation that they probably have Gutierrez as the reserve driver, simply because obviously keeping the Mexican money coming in and keeping the Mexican, that would probably be the best way to keep the Mexican sponsors happy, considering that Perez and Gutierrez have the same sponsors. Of course, I forgot to switch my way through that, but... And also news in Formula 3, we have a driver change. Enam Ahmed and his sponsors have parted way with Carlin, and replacing him will be Ben Barnicoat, taking part actually in his first single-seater race since 2016. Which is going to be interesting to see how he gets on. And finally, and this is really good from Formula 1, they are going to be doing a official anti-racism protest in the run-up to the British Grand Prix. How, we don't know, but let's hope that it gets the message across and doesn't just last this race, because it's an important message that many people within the sport, particularly the current world champion Lewis Hamilton and his team Mercedes, who obviously have painted their car in black to support the campaign for this year. It's going to be... They have been really outspoken in their campaign against racism. They have really spoken up about it. Not sure outspoken is the right way to say it, but they have spoken up about the campaign against racism and the whole Black Lives Matter thing. And the fact that Formula 1 is doing something about it, actually officially, is a really good sign that things are changing. Because there have been many people stating that F1 is behind with this. Enam Ahmed, on the subject of him, he actually mentioned a BBC article that Motorsport is like 20 years behind. I seem to remember he said, in the battle against racism. The fact that Lewis Hamilton's the only black driver ever to have participated in the sport doesn't really show F1's stance against racism in good light. And there needs to be more opportunities for ethnic minority groups. And hopefully there will be a change, and hopefully we will see more people from ethnic minorities taking part in motorsport, whether it's as a driver or whether it's as a team member, because we really need that. There's no reason why diversity should not be embraced. But now, let's talk about the weekend in hand. And now, let's preview the British Grand Prix. And do a team-by-team preview. In reverse constructors order. Williams are currently bottom of the constructors table, but they have shown improvements this year, and they have an upgrade coming for this weekend. George Russell has stated that he hopes to pick up the pieces if anyone else in front falters, and hopes to maybe score Williams' first points of the season to get them off the mark. Next up we have Haas, and they come off the back of a solid showing in Hungary, considering Haas have stated that they would do that strategy call again despite the penalty, which is no surprise. They did still benefit from it despite an unpopular penalty that the rules will probably be changed, but their prospects for this weekend are quite bleak, to be honest, as they have a Ferrari power unit right now. Obviously their struggles, that this track might expose the Ferrari power unit's weaknesses. Same could really be said for Alfa Romeo, because they are struggling with the Ferrari power unit's weaknesses, and I think it's going to be a difficult weekend for all Ferrari powered teams. AlphaTauri have had a few disappointments so far. They've shown good midfield pace, but their reliability hasn't been great. Pierre Gasly showed really good pace in Hungary, but retired early on, and was the race's only retirement. But the car shows good pace, so if it's reliable, then they should have some good results. They should be fighting for points. It can be said Renault have had a similar season to last year so far, in the form of kind of underperforming, but this track has historically been kind of okay for them. But it's going to be interesting to see. They do need to improve if they want to make their way to the frontrunners, although I'm not really sure that they are expecting to be frontrunners until the new regulations. But this car seems to have similar strengths and weaknesses to the last year's car. So I'm expecting a similar midfield showing to before from them. It looks like it could be a rocky road ahead for Ferrari. They have actually stated that they don't even expect to be winning races before 2022. Obviously, they're going to be stuck with this car for 2021. And it looks like it could be a rocky road for them. And this track may, as I said with all Ferrari power units, but more the case with Ferrari with a draggy car, is going to expose their weaknesses the most, with it being important when it comes to straight line speed. So it's expected to be probably another tough weekend for Ferrari. Likewise, however, Racing Point do go into this weekend on a high into their home track. However, they have hit obviously, I mentioned the fact about Sergio Perez's inconclusive coronavirus test. If he can't race, obviously that is going to be quite bad news for the team. But the car is fast, so that should So whatever happens, that should still benefit them quite a lot. But having an prepared driver in the car that's in the last minute is not really would not really be ideal for them. But the car is fast and should work well round this circuit. Likewise, McLaren we have, and that they have a good car, as obvious before, and I'm not really expecting this weekend to be any different pace-wise. They had a bit of a disappointment in Hungary, but that was partly due to some bad luck with regards to the strategy and the rain conditions. But I think McLaren should be optimistic going into this weekend. Next up we have Red Bull, whose car looked very difficult to drive in Hungary. They have stated that there is an aerodynamic anomaly with the car, so whether they have managed to get on top of it, or whether they can get on top of it, we will have to see come Silverstone, come this weekend, because this track could expose aerodynamic anomalies quite a lot if they haven't been able to work out how to manage it. It could be a bit of a difficult car to drive at this track. And of course, we have the favourites for this weekend. No doubt, Mercedes once again. This car has historically really suited this track, and there's no reason to believe that this year is going to be any different. And I think there is a good chance that Lewis Hamilton could take a 7th British Grand Prix victory this weekend, if the car continues to be as quick as it has been. Next up, we talk about the Formula 2 series. A brief preview to the Formula 2 series, which takes place for its 4th weekend of its 2020 season. And looking at the drivers' standings for the Formula 2 Championship, it is Robert Schwartzman who leads the way on 81 points, and he goes into this race with a lot of momentum. An 18-point gap around this going into the Silverstone round, and his form so far this year suggests that he can extend that gap after his, what I thought was a real breakthrough gap drive in the Hungarian feature race. It wasn't his first win but in the series this year, but it did really put himself out there and show him to be a star of the future. However, this track historically hasn't suited him that well. Last year, he only finished 5th in the Formula 3 feature race, and he finished 2nd in the sprint race, but it wasn't his best track last year, so this could be a real tester, because if he's fast here, he might. But at the end, again, the Hungaroring wasn't his best track, and we all saw what happened there. So it'll be interesting to see if he's fast here. But of course, he has challenge from home hero Callum Ilott, who hopes that he can get a home win. He made his Formula 2 debut at this track. It's easy to forget. He did a Formula 2 race in 2017 at Silverstone with Trident. But he sits 18 points behind, and he's 20 points ahead of Christian Lundgaard, who's had a very good start to the season. Then you have Mick Schumacher on 39 points, who will hope. I mean, he had a rough season opener, but he's hoping to get himself further up the order. The Prima pair look to be really strong so far this year, and it looks like they're going to run away with the constructor standings. As for in the standings, we haven't really seen the best, or we have kind of seen the best of Guan Yu Zhu after in Australia when he was leading before his car conked out, but we haven't seen his best when it comes to results. So it's going to be interesting to see if he can finally get the result that he got pole here last year. So this could be a good opportunity for him to get his maiden Formula 2 victory finally. Also, Luca Giotto, who currently sits in 10th in the standings, off the back of a victory. He won the feature race last year, and it'll be interesting to see how he can do. Of course, Jack Aitken won the sprint race in quite incredible circumstances last year, with a very ballsy overtake on Louis Delatrese, and he is up. But he's had a struggle, and the experienced drivers have struggled so far this year, being shown up by the rookies. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens this weekend. Can Robert Schwartzman maintain his momentum, or will other drivers start to close the gap? We'll have to see. And then we have the Formula 3 series. I did mention that we do have a driver change in the form of Ben Barnicoat replacing Enam Ahmed. As I mentioned before, it's Barnicoat's first race in single-seater since 2016. He's since been having a GT career. Is this going to be a return to single-seaters for him? Or is he just in as a kind of a placeholder for... and someone else is going to take over for the remainder of the season? That remains to be seen. But he is currently contesting in the GT World Challenge Europe Endurance Cup. He's done one race in that so far. But is this going to be a full-time seat? Or is in a return to single-seaters? Or is this just a one-off? We'll have to see. And if it is a one-off, who will replace him? But looking at the driver's standings going into this, Oscar Piastri seems to have broken clear. He is up. He is now 26 points ahead of Logan Sargent in second. In third place, you have Théo Pourchaire, who's become he's the only repeat winner this year. Then you have David Beckman coming off the back of a victory in the second race in Hungary. Then you have Richard Verschoor in fifth. Frederick Vesti has had a lot of bad luck this year, sits in sixth. Then you have Larim Zendelli, Liam Lawson, Alex Peroni, who's with the quite a few we've had quite a few wet races, and Alex Peroni has struggled in those, so he could be higher in the standings. And then you have Sebastian Fernandez, who's also been quite unlucky so far this year. It's going to be... Oscar Piastri does have experience at this track from the British F4 Championship and his other series that he's done, which could come in handy. So, it'll be interesting to see if that enables him to extend his standings, if that enables him to keep his advantage. However, there are quite a lot of drivers who've had a lot of bad luck so far this year, which I think if they have a good race, they can get back into title contention. Of course, especially if Piastri has a bad race, that could really hurt his title chances. Although he has a 26-point gap, which is quite good. But I'm expecting the likes of Vesti, Fernandez, and quite a few drivers who are outside the top 10, such as Smollier maybe, to work their way further up the order as the season goes on. But right now it seems the title contenders are the likes of Piastri, Sargent and Pourchaire. Maybe Beckman is in there as well. So, that is more or less it. Going through the drivers' standings now, going into this race. It is Lewis Hamilton that leads the drivers' standings ahead of Valtteri Bottas in second. He has a 5-point gap back to Valtteri Bottas in second. And it's not all sealed. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton has the upper hand right now, but Bottas could easily get that gap, get the lead back if Lewis Hamilton falters in any way. Then you have Max Verstappen, who is starting to slowly fall away from the two Mercedes. Then you have Lando Norris, who's had an incredible season so far. Then you have Alex Albon, who is going to be wanting to up his game after a disappointing qualifying in Hungary, but a good race for him. Then you have Sergio Perez, Charles Leclerc, who's kind of outperformed the car in quite a few ways in 7th. Then you have Lance Stroll in 8th, Carlos Sainz in 9th, and Sebastian Vettel in 10th. So you have 5 teams making up the top 10. And that is going into the race. I mean, of course, I've already gone through the order, but you have the constructors' standings. Mercedes have a massive gap, almost over double the points of Red Bull. Then you have McLaren and Racing Point, who are in a battle for third after both teams having good starts to the season. Then you have Ferrari in 5th. Then you have Renault in 6th, AlphaTauri in 7th, Alfa Romeo in 8th, Haas in 9th, with Williams as the only team yet to score. So, that is it for my preview stream. Make sure you tune in tomorrow for the Friday recap, which will take place after all the track action from Silverstone has completed tomorrow. The track action from Silverstone taking place tomorrow has been completed. We will see you and hope you enjoy the British Grand Prix weekend. It's a shame that British fans such as myself can't be there this weekend, but let's hope we have an exciting race weekend to make up for that. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you tomorrow for the Friday recap. Goodbye.